suburban eastern Australia, an environment that has, over time, evolved some extraordinarily unique groups of Homo sapiens. But today, we observe a small tribe akin to a group of meerkats that gather together atop a small mound to watch, question, and discuss the current events of their city, their country, and their world at large. Let's listen keenly and observe this group fondly known as the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove.
Yes, dear listener, episode 220, your regular group of meerkats have gathered together. We're standing on a small hill in the western suburbs of Brisbane. We're looking out and we see a shitload of problems out there. Run, hide. There's all sorts of things going on. It's not good.
It's not pretty.
Yeah. Have you ever seen a depressed meerkat? Well, you're looking at one now.
Yeah. Let's see if we can cheer him up tonight, Scott.
Yeah, because I am depressed. So this is the Iron Fist Velvet Glove podcast. This is an Australian podcast, weekly, award-winning no less. We won the Brisbane Podcasters Award. And we look at news and politics, sex and religion. Not too much sex on this episode, I don't think.
Do you think we should have more sex?
I've got one penis item to talk about.
Oh, good.
But yeah. Language warning is always in place. We have a little explicit warning on the podcast. Occasionally we drop the F word, and tonight we definitely will when I talk about fucking Scott Morrison.
Oh.
And so if you've got kids around, discretion is advised. With me as always, Scott. Well, not as always. Recovering from his migraines, Scott the Velvet Glove.
G'day Trevor, g'day Paul, g'day listeners. How are we all?
Well, we're good. You're obviously fully recovered.
I'm fully recovered, yes.
Very good. Good to have you back. We missed you. Yeah.
You missed my beer, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Just getting my own stash.
There is that, but...
And Paul the 12th man.
G'day everyone, how are yous? Welcome back, Scott.
Thank you, Paul.
Cheer up, Trevor.
It could be worse, Trevor. We could have Donald Trump down under.
Do you know, I was thinking about it just before you arrived, and I thought, who would annoy me more, Donald Trump or Scott Morrison? And I think Scott Morrison annoys me more.
Really?
Yeah. So, yes, there are aspects of Donald Trump that would be more appealing than
God.
Scott Morrison.
Bloody hell.
The smirking of Scott Morrison just got to me. Because in preparation for this podcast, I had to listen and watch him on some stuff. And
What you put yourself through
exactly,
for the
the
listeners.
smirking of Scott Morrison in the past week has really just poisoned the system. So let's do a podcast and try and get it out of my
You
system.
might need a spiritual enema or something like that. You know?
Maybe. Well, I think a podcast. I think episode 220 is going to do the trick. So it's not on my list, but you guys mentioned that during the week, since we last met, you went to a talk by Jacinta Price.
We did indeed.
We did.
And it was very good value, in my opinion.
It was really good, actually. She's quite a good speaker, isn't she?
She's a very good speaker. In fact, I was impressed because I'd seen her previously briefly on things like Q&A and you know, she was quite not reserved, but you know, she didn't sort of go out of her way to sort of break out and, you know, let everybody know what she was thinking. She was quite measured. But on stage, just her and a mic, no interview or anything like that, she was full of it. I mean, full of beans, full of verve for, you know, her message, what she wanted to share with people. And she was quite personable and entertaining. And I found her very...
So just her alone on a stage, for an hour or so?
Yeah, it was more than an hour.
Hour and a half.
Although we had an
thereabouts.
Interruption.
Yeah, there was an interruption. There was an Aboriginal bloke up in the top
And
area.
a woman, I think. There was
And
at
a
least
woman,
a couple of them.
And he was screaming at her because... what'd she say? She said she's not going to do the welcome to country because she's not sure if she could get it right in Brisbane.
Okay.
So she was actually saying that, you know, you're supposed to do it properly for the various tribes in the area.
Yeah.
Right.
And she didn't know who the actual tribes were in the area, so she didn't want to offend or anything like that. So, and this guy went Burko, didn't he?
He went totally bananas, yes.
Right.
He was yelling, he was thumping his fist on the banister of the... It was in the, what do you call it? The dress circle area of this old theatre, that where it took place. And he was banging his hand on the banister of the railing and yelling at her, and he was becoming very abusive. And you could hear this woman up behind him screaming her head off. The security people went up, and they were very cautious about physically touching this guy, I suppose for obvious reasons. And they were trying to talk him into leaving, and he wasn't leaving. And finally, they called the police, and she went off stage. Jacinta went off stage to try and, I suppose, help them calm down the situation. And finally, the police came, and they were led away.
So without the interruption, it may be an hour 15 if she just was uninterrupted.
I think it was more than that. I think it was at least an hour and a half.
Notes? Like she working off notes?
No.
Didn't appear to be.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
To hold a crowd captivated for over an hour without notes, just talking.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
She was
alone.
She was really quite
good
impressive.
speaker.
I mean, like she, and I take your point, Trevor, where you said that she's a Tory and that sort of stuff. She is. I don't think there's any doubt about that. She is a conservative. However, some of the conservative message, it's probably high time it came out.
Right.
You know,
That sort of help yourself, pull yourself up by your bootstraps
not
message?
not really that. It was she was, you know, throw rocks at me for saying it, but she was being quite critical of her own Indigenous brethren, wasn't she?
Some of them, for
Some
sure.
of them, yeah.
Yeah.
She was quite critical of them, and she said, you know, this victim mentality, we've got to deal with it, we've got to move on from it. And, you know, she's also doesn't want to see the date changed for Australia Day. I'd happen to disagree with her on that. I think, you know, if you should change it just to try and give them something, you know, just to try and put them all to sleep.
Basically, she's against anything that divides the country. She several times made a point of saying, look, we're all Australians. We're all in this together.
Yes. Yeah.
And she's tired of people being singled out as Indigenous or non-Indigenous. She said, look, we're all Aussies. And she feels like she has a foot in both camps, obviously, because
Her husband's white.
not only that, her father.
Right.
Her father is a European Australian.
Right.
Her mother's an Indigenous Australian. And she said she grew up, and she had a few photos of her in her childhood. And clearly she her social circles were a very mixed, ethnically mixed group. So she grew up surrounded by people of different backgrounds, different skin tones, if you want to put it like that. And she just felt that, I think, you know, people are people, regardless of what colour their skin is, where their parents come from. People are people. She said, we're all Aussies, we're all in this together. And she was sick of this, trying to divide people into camps and, playing the victim all the time.
Yep, that's good.
Her message was very positive, I thought.
Yes. Did she talk much about economics? Or
No, not really.
Okay, it was more social issues.
It was more on social
okay,
issues.
I think I would have agreed with her 100%
I
on
think
all
you
those
probably
things.
would have.
Yeah.
But she did stay away from the economics, which is
Yeah, I
probably a
don't
good thing
remember her
for her
talking about
because
economics.
the economics and that sort of stuff, she would have lost us there. Because
Well, it's interesting that she can hold an audience for an hour and a half talking about the social
Very
issues.
effectively. And in fact, she got a standing ovation
Wow.
at the end.
Wow.
How many people do you reckon? 400,
thereabouts,
something like that?
Yeah,
Wow.
300 or 400, I would
Yeah.
have thought.
And she was very, very warmly received.
Right.
And a couple of them were Indigenous who were downstairs that were watching.
Yeah, there were a few faces in the crowd that looked Indigenous.
Yeah. And, you know, it's just...
All right.
I was really quite impressed with her anyway. And, you know, they said that, what was it, the guy said, he says, will you be the second female Prime Minister in the country? And she laughed that off and all that sort of thing. But I could see her doing something like that. You know, I'm not saying that she's going to do it, but she's
got the
certainly got the
intellectual
ability.
capacity. She's got the gift of the gab. I think I wouldn't mind seeing her as a government minister of some sort, I have to say.
Right.
I think she'd be quite good value.
What's her current role? She's still
She's
councillor or something?
councillor
Alice
and
Alice
Springs
Springs
Town
Mayor?
Councillor.
Okay, yeah. All right, well, enough on Jacinta. So
But
anyone,
well done, Jacinta, if you're
yes,
listening.
good on you. And in the other states, maybe people can still see her if she's on some speaking
Indeed.
tour around
Yeah.
Australia.
I would encourage people to go and see her if they get the chance.
Right, during this past week, Gladys Liu is the Chinese-born. Is she Chinese-born?
Chinese-born
member for Chisholm. Yep. In a district that's got lots of
Chinese people.
yes, Chinese expats
Is
and
she
whatever.
Chinese or Hong Kong born?
I think she's Hong Kong.
Yeah,
born,
I think
but,
so.
You know, they don't.
Which is technically
Chinese.
part of China, but
Yes.
when she was born, it wasn't.
Yes. So she's been in the news because there's talk about what links she has to different Chinese organisations that may be closely linked with the Chinese government, and whether she should have declared them. And she was on an Andrew Bolt interview, and she was saying she couldn't remember, and he was pushing the point, and then she was saying, no, I wasn't. And then later on she came out and said, well, yes, I was, but I resigned. And what she was and when she resigned and what she revealed, you know, it's hard to keep track of it all. But the point is, it's an organisation that has got very, close ties to the Chinese Communist Party, if not
Very close.
if not is actually part of the Chinese Communist Party.
Indeed.
And that's all well and good. Like, people need to declare potential conflicts of interest, and I've been saying that people need to declare their religion, because if they're making laws about religion, they need to declare whether they've got one, like you would have thought, but didn't seem to gain much traction. But but to me, the important thing about it is the reactions, the post sort of reaction to it, where Scott Morrison basically played the race card. And I've got a clip here. So I'll play a little bit of Morrison and what he had to say, because Labor Party and others were criticising her, and it was for what she had done. It was not anything to do with the fact that she was Chinese. It was her associations and her activities. So
Obviously.
anyway, this is what Morrison had to say. I'll play some of this.
This has a very grubby undertone in terms of the smear that is being placed on Gladys Liu. And I think people should reflect very carefully in the way they've sought to attack Gladys over this matter, and the broader smear that I think that is implied in that over more than 1 million other Australians.
And are you saying this is racist?
Well, I'll let others draw their conclusions. But what I do know, Gladys is a Chinese-born Australian. Does that make her in cahoots with the Chinese government? Of course not. It's a ridiculous suggestion, and I think it's an insult to every single Chinese Australian in this country. And you know, it wouldn't be the first time the Labor Party has made comments like this in my home state of New South Wales. We all remember the last New South Wales state election.
I can't listen to any more of him.
You know,
Yeah, don't bring up your dinner.
Briefly, I'll just play a little bit more. Penny Wong came out in Parliament, spoke very well to say the only person being racist here is you, Scott Morrison, in raising this race card.
Look, Scott Morrison even said himself in that clip, he said the fact that she was, what did he say? The fact that she was born in China, does that make, every Chinese?
The 1.2 million Aussie
Does
Chinese.
that implicate every Chinese?
Yeah.
No, of course not.
No, of course not.
I mean, he contradicted himself in a sense, didn't you think?
Well, he's just trying to say that that's what the others are implicating, those 1.2 million. It was just...
And nobody else has said it. He was the only person that has made even the merest suggestion.
Yeah. So Penny Wong came out in Parliament. She bagged him appropriately. And then some reporters talked to him a bit later on about it as well. And I'll play this little clip as well, and then we'll discuss.
Prime Minister, why was it racist to question Gladys Liu's connections to China, but it wasn't racist to call Sam Dastyari Shanghai Sam?
I didn't use either of those phrases.
The only problem, Belinda, is, well, it's simply not true.
I mean, Shanghai Sam, we all know. Shanghai Sam, it's about Shanghai Sam, and he's got to go.
As Treasurer Scott Morrison
Repeatedly used that phrase, Shanghai Sam.
Yeah. Okay, you can make a mistake. But when you've used it 16 times. And he came out afterwards and he said, I didn't hear the reporter correctly. I just thought she talked about racism. But the whole premise of the question was he wouldn't have understood the question. He would have had to say, what do you mean, if he didn't hear the Shanghai Sam reference? Yep. The question made no sense if you didn't hear that. So when he said, I misunderstood the question, I thought she just said, racism, and I didn't say racism. And the thing that gets me is there's so much just BS in this whole thing, and he smirks away and he knows he's just going to get away with it. Like, he can say whatever shit he likes and nobody's going to pay attention except for political junkies doing a podcast or political junkies listening and watching a podcast. But, you know, for the 95% of Australians, they're not paying any attention to this, and they won't for another 2 years and 9 months when they front up on a Saturday morning and go, oh, we're going to vote for again. None of this will be relevant. It'll just be, the daggy dad thing. Are they going to fall for it or not? And it's just the way that you can have, you know, national security is so important, but then, it's one of mine. I'll forget that. You know, how dare you allege national security as an issue here? Like, well, she's been cleared. It's all good. Nothing to see here. It's such a double standard. It's such bullshit. I hate having people think they can get one over on me.
But he's a complete hypocrite.
Yes.
You know, I mean, he's the one that's been leading this, you know, move in the Pacific to make sure the, you know, small South Pacific nations are on our side, because everybody knows China is doing their best to expand their, you know, sphere of influence into our geopolitical region. And now he's saying, you know, she couldn't possibly be a spy for the Chinese. Yes. She couldn't possibly be.
Yes.
Because she's in our party.
Indeed. The interesting thing is that in the on the voting day, the signage in the electorate in Chinese indicated it was official sort of stuff from the electoral office that indicated the correct way to vote.
Yep.
Was
for the
to
Liberals.
vote for the Liberal Party. And so that's headed to the High Court later this week to determine whether there should be another election.
Indeed.
And
that she violated electoral guidelines?
Indeed. And, you know, high chance of
A by-election.
And what was the margin in her seat, Scott?
It was pretty slim. I think it was only 1% or something like that.
1,000 votes.
And there was another woman of Chinese ancestry running for the Labor Party.
Correct.
in the
There
same
was,
seat.
yes.
Yeah. So that will be interesting to see. You know, nobody cares, but maybe in that electorate you could find 500 who might switch, and we could have a hung parliament because they've got a 2-seat majority.
They got a 2-seat majority,
and
and
it
then
swung the other
they-
way. It'd be a.
Well, they've got a 2-seat majority. They've taken their one down for a speaker. That leaves them with 1-seat majority on the floor. If Gladys Liu does lose the seat and ends up back over in the Labor column, then that then ends up that you end up with a technically not a hung parliament, but you'll end up with an effective hung parliament because the voters don't see what's going on there. Well, because the speaker would only have to vote if he was set up with a hung parliament.
So that would just scare the bejesus
And
out
look,
of Scott Morrison,
It
if
would,
that's
yes.
possible.
And let's hope it does, because you've also got, sorry to keep getting on about this, is you've also got Josh Frydenberg. Now, he's got Section 44 clouds over his head, over his citizenship, which he inherited from his parents.
Yes, dear listener, look at a previous episode where we had his the Hungarian sort of notation of citizenship on his parents'
Birth
papers.
certificate, papers that
Entry
when they
papers,
arrived in
yeah.
Australia.
And look, none of us really know whether Gladys Liu really should be suspect, but the possibility is there. And think about it. If she were a sleeper agent, you know, of some description, she's perfect, isn't she? I mean, she comes across as this sort of, you know, honest, you know, quite sort of, you know, almost vulnerable woman, you know, that gets our sympathy when she cries in Parliament.
Yes.
She could be the perfect sleeper agent if she were one. And I'm not saying she is.
Yeah. Look, I think she should have just declared, I am a member of this group. And people could say, well, that's a communist front, like that's part of the Communist Party.
It
And she
absolutely
could
is.
legitimately say, well, look, I'm wanting contacts with the Chinese community. you could say that about any Chinese group that it has got contacts with the Communist Party. Like, it's hard to be part of a substantial group that does stuff in the Chinese community that isn't part of the Communist Party. Therefore, it's just it's an evil that can't be avoided. Or she wouldn't need to use those words, but she could basically say, "Hey, they might be, they may not, or yes, they are. But in any case, I'm developing ties with the Chinese community, and that's just the way it is. So suck it up, buttercup."
And there was the
and you couldn't
Confucian
really
Institute.
complain about it. You'd have to say, well, okay, and declare it, and she would have been fine. So as with a lot of these things, it's the cover-ups that cause the issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's the dishonesty
Yeah.
that we don't like. And as soon as a politician starts saying, "Oh, well, I don't recall that," immediately my antennae go up and I'm like, really?
Yeah. In the chat room, Rex says this is a case of a Manchurian candidate, perhaps.
Could
Good one,
be.
Rex. Yes, and hello, Bronwyn and Daniel.
Yes.
That's good. Manchurian candidate.
What's that southern province? Guangdong? The Guangdong candidate.
Yeah. So,
She's the Hong Kong candidate, isn't she?
yeah. But the whole thing about it in that nobody cares. It's just, I don't think people... Do you think people care? Do you think the average Joe, if you walk down the street and said Gladys Liu, does that issue matter to you?
No,
How many people,
I
if you
think
interviewed
you'd get-
100 people in the Queen Street Mall, how many could say,
One, perhaps two, would actually say, well, she's got something to answer.
Yeah, you're right, Trevor.
yeah,
Yeah.
It's only the political junkies like us that are really interested.
yeah. And, this is the thing about, if this was a Labor person, then the Murdoch press would be going
Would
to
be
town.
town. They'd be going to town on
Channel
a bit
9
demanding
would
that she
be.
strung up. Yeah.
Sky News would be livid. And
They spent quite a lot of time on this issue on Insiders on Sunday. Do you watch
Right.
Insiders?
no,
Oh, you don't?
no.
Oh, you should.
Right.
It's
I
quite
rely on
interesting.
you, Paul,
Oh, thanks.
to do the ABC
Do you watch
sort
it,
of
Scott?
stuff.
I watch the Insiders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's often good value, I think.
It is, yeah.
yeah. So it's a lack of engagement on something that just paints Scott Morrison as a complete asshole, and yet friends of mine I know in 2 years, 9 months' time are going to go, "Oh, Scott Morrison, he's okay. He's a nice guy. He's a good guy. Daggy dad, he's all right." And it's just like, no, these are the things that show what a bastard he is. So that's
what a
that's what gets me.
two-faced hypocrite he is.
Yeah. And it's the smirking. So I saw him on the 7:30 report a week or so ago, and you see him in these interviews, and he's confident
Very confident. Why
Because-
wouldn't he be?
because he knows he can throw shit and none of it will stick on him because he's got the media on his side, and the media that's not on his side is too timid to do anything about it, and he can just smirk his way through.
It's
and
for
even
those of us on this podcast.
yeah.
We saw what happened after he deposed a prime minister, and then less than 12 months later, he won an election,
Yes.
virtually single-handed.
Yes.
So why wouldn't he be confident?
Extremely confident. So, and with good reason. Like, it's just, that's what's depressing me.
So you think he's got 99% of Australians pegged as mugs?
Yes. He's previously had jobs where he's always had a boss, as we all do, in some, unless you're self-employed, I guess. But, and he's got into trouble in the tourism job he had. And
Oh, he lost that one, didn't he?
Yeah, in very murky circumstances. Now he's top dog, and there's nobody telling him anything. He's a man who's just realised, holy shit, I can get away with whatever I like here, and he is cocky and smirky to go with it.
And he's going to ride the wave as
that's-
far as it takes him.
That's what gets me. And he'll do things now like, national security, we need these tyrannical laws. But it's one of my members, nothing to see here. Welfare, sinners, we need to, impose a bit of prosperity gospel thinking here. Clearly, these people need some moral adjusting here. Let's
And indeed,
work on
and
that.
on that topic, I saw him in the last couple of days almost shedding a tear because he was empathising with people who'd lost their homes in bushfires and things like that. But does he shed a tear for the people just trying to survive on New Start?
No.
Not one. No. Nothing. Not even a moist eye for them.
No. So they're out of
He's
favour.
very selective with his
It's the
sympathy, isn't he?
prosperity gospel stuff. If you're one of his, then
You
sympathetic.
deserve it. You deserve sympathy.
So we're just going to face 3 years of this smarmy, this smug BS from this guy, and he's going to bring out the worst in us. Like, he's going to encourage short-term, shallow, selfish materialism with a dose of prosperity gospel moralising thrown in. Like, he's going to bring out the worst in our community, I think. He's going to teach us to love billionaires and despise welfare recipients, and he'll talk about supporting the community and hard-working Australians.
Yeah.
But when it comes to community, the only ones he's really going to support are religious communities. He's going to strip all the funding away from any other community. And hard-working Australians, he's going to con them into accepting neoliberal trickle-down bullshit, and they're going to swallow it. That's what is depressing me. Yeah, so work on me here.
Paint a very depressing picture.
Yeah.
But it's also quite an accurate forecast of where we are headed. You know, it's a hell of a concern.
Yeah.
Because this guy is out of control, and there's got no one that's going to put the brakes on him.
Yep, he's got free reign.
Well, you know, I mean, we were just talking about it before.
He's appointed Kevin Andrews,
To
do a
oversees the
review.
review of
family
law
law.
courts, which makes no sense whatsoever.
Not to us, anyway. Makes sense to ScoMo, apparently.
Yeah. Speaking of looking to the future, Christian Porter is sort of held out as a future leader. If ScoMo meets
Well, he has the right name for it.
Yeah, Christian, yes. And
I didn't think he was all that religious, though, is he?
I don't think he is.
No, he's not. No. He's religious. He believes in God, but not very much, it seems. But he's prepared to write laws for those who do. And he also played the race card when he was in Parliament. So he played the same card about this whole thing that Morrison did.
About Gladys Liu?
Yes, yeah. So not to be trusted. Some people really like him, but there was an article from Crikey which was talking about Christian Porter and saying, why are all these people so enamoured with Christian Porter? Because when he was in the Western Australian State Parliament, he wasn't very good. Have you heard this?
No, I haven't heard
I
that.
didn't know he was in Western
So
Australia.
this is Joe Boswell writing in Crikey saying that these glowing reports have omitted a few details. Readers in Western Australia in particular will recall Porter's stint as the State Treasurer in his 2011-12 budget speech. He made a wild assumption that the GST formula would be revised imminently in Western Australia's favour. His budget bravely anticipated GST windfalls of several $1 billion for the state in the coming years, when the wholly predictable reality was Western Australia's share would keep falling very fast. Consequently, he wrecked the state's finances, trashed the Liberal government's reputation, and arguably did more than anyone to put Labor back in power. So that's interesting. Hadn't heard that before.
I hadn't heard that one either.
Yeah.
No.
So
What year was that, roughly?
2011, 2012, that budget. Yeah. Right, that's enough of the depressing stuff there.
Well, that in itself would probably write him off as ever being a leader.
No, Scott Morrison was sacked for incompetence
Yeah, I know.
in the tourism thing.
But Scott Morrison wasn't on the public record, though, whereas Christian Porter was.
Well,
What
history
about John
doesn't
Howard?
seem to affect these guys.
John Howard had a bit of an up and down career.
Yeah, I know that.
They seem to get away with these things. Yeah. Hey, here's an interesting one for you. Dear listener, we have in Brisbane an annual Riverfire festival.
Yeah. I'm not sure how I feel about this.
I'm not sure either. I enjoy watching the jets fly over on Saturday on their practice runs.
So this time of year, on the Brisbane River at various points, there are fireworks, and it's a fun event to go to and be on the riverbank and watch the fireworks and with friends or whatever. And it's an annual thing that happens as part of the festival this time of year. And there was an article in the paper saying that Riverfire Fireworks Spectacular is under threat, with a social media campaign calling for it to be cancelled and funding diverted to fire victims and farmers. So we've obviously had bad bushfires in Queensland, southeast Queensland, and farmers are suffering a drought. So the Riverfire Facebook page is the target of a major backlash from keyboard warriors, and a petition's been set up to axe the show. And the petition creators said, this is Lauren Darwin said, with the kick Mother Nature has dished out to regional and rural Queensland since the beginning of the year, I believe there is a greater need in the state than a night of extravagant fireworks. It really served no purpose apart from entertaining city dwellers, given the very real struggles communities are having, such as floods earlier this year in the north, Clifton with no fuel in town, Stanthorpe and Warwick without water, and a horrific bushfire season. There are more worthy causes than an evening of fireworks. Gentlemen, what do you think? Should fireworks be cancelled?
Well, I can sort of understand where they're coming from because, you know, it is a fireworks thing that is designed to entertain us city dwellers. You know, people out in the regions don't ever get anything like this, you know.
They probably wouldn't want it. It'd start a bushfire.
Exactly. But having said that, though, I mean, you're always going to have problems. You're never going to have enough rain in the driest continent on Earth. So we're always going to have drought conditions for much of the state. So I'm not convinced that us going without fireworks and putting the money into the farmers' pockets is going to make much difference.
How much money roughly do you think it'd be?
It's a couple of million
Couple of
dollars.
million, yeah.
It would be, assuming you can actually cancel that now and not face a breach of
No,
contract,
they would have
damages
a contract
clause.
for sure.
But, you know, leave that to the side for the moment.
But assuming you could,
yes.
how much? What would it buy? It might buy, you know, a few hundred water trucks trucking water up to Warwick and Stanthorpe.
But we are trucking water.
We are doing it,
So
and
we're paying for it
it.
out of general revenue.
We
So
are.
the money we would save would go into general revenue, and
And think about all those poor children who were looking forward to the fireworks.
So do you think it should be cancelled or not?
I really don't have a strong view on this one, but I have a better idea. Let's cancel Christmas. I mean, people spend a lot more money on Christmas. No, seriously. And
Just
let's
gonna
face it.
change your name here to the Grinch.
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean, Christmas is it's a phony celebration anyway. Jesus was not born on December 25th, if ever at all. Think of all the billions people spend on Christmas. I mean, how far would that go to help the struggling farmers?
We obviously don't have a retail shop.
Me?
Yeah.
No, obviously I'm not in retail, so I don't stand to lose.
You know, because, you know, the
You know,
struggling farmers...
50% of my year's revenue probably comes around Christmas, right?
Well, the struggling farmers need rain, and the struggling retailers need
money.
Christmas.
Yeah, they need Christmas.
It's the same thing. So my good wife was talking to me about this fireworks one, and she said she initially thought it was a good idea to cancel it. And I said, "Are you insane?" Incidentally, Mrs. Fist, she's catching up on, you know, I said she was falling behind with the podcast. As we're driving back from the Gold Coast, she was putting on a podcast from the Conversation Hour or something like that. And it was on fast speed when she put it on. And she confessed that in order to catch up on our podcast, she's been playing them at 1.5 speed.
Really? Might
And then
be
she
more
re-
entertaining.
And then she really insulted us by saying it actually still made complete sense and she could follow it fine. Anyway.
Mrs. Fist.
Yeah, Mrs. Fist. So, okay, back to the fireworks. Incidentally, dear listener, from other areas outside of southeast Queensland, Riverfire fireworks used to be unbelievably good when we had the F-111 jets who would put their afterburners on and fire up into the sky because the Amberley Air Force Base was not far and they used to come in, put their afterburners on and go, and it was just the highlight of the year. It was so worthwhile going just to see
So you don't think the F-18s cut it?
They can't put on the same afterburners.
They can't, but they're still
but it's
interesting
You could
to
see
watch.
them from all over Brisbane. You could see the F-111s with the afterburners. So anyway, back to this thing. So when I was talking to my wife, I said, well, I was thinking about it afterwards, and this is where lawyers sort of thinking comes into play.
You haven't been able to break that.
No, I
habit.
haven't. And it's obviously clear when we talk about this stuff that I'm thinking like a lawyer does quite often. And what you do when faced with these sorts of things, I reckon, when you've studied enough law, is you think, well, what's the general rule that I would come up with, the general principle that I would be applying here? How could I construct a general rule that would deal with this situation? And then are there any exceptions? Like, so when you're framing a sort of a principle, you would have a series of elements that make up things, and then you have a series of exemptions. So you would say, if A, B and C exist, then this rule applies. So maybe you're guilty of an offence, or you must pay this tax, or you need this licence, unless exemptions D, E or F exist. For example, self-defence, so you're not guilty, or you're under 18, so you don't have to pay this tax, or you're Indigenous, so you don't need this fishing licence like everybody else. Yep. So you normally have sort of elements and then exemptions, and you create a general rule to try and spell out the thought. And then, can you come up with a rule that makes sense and doesn't have crazy exemptions? And then you know you've got a reasonable theory. So, so looking at this sort of fireworks thing, is the rule that you're trying to create something like, in times of natural disasters, it is inappropriate to hold festivals?
To be happy.
Is that the general rule that we're applying here? Can it be narrowed down or defined any further? But that seems to be the thought process is, if there is a natural disaster somewhere, it's then inappropriate to hold festivals anywhere, nearby-ish. So
That seems to be the general rule. I
Yeah.
disagree with that, but anyway.
yeah, and then you start to see the problems, and you go, well, as you mentioned, there's nearly always a drought somewhere in Australia. Like, is there a time when there's not a drought in Australia somewhere?
No.
Probably not.
So then did you say, oh, well, you know, are we just talking about Queensland then? Do we have to restrict it to that? So we say, oh, if there's not a natural disaster in Queensland, then, well, if there is a natural disaster in Queensland, we can't hold a festival in
But
Queensland.
that's very parochial, isn't it?
It is, but, you know, if there's just
I mean,
over
if
the border,
there was a big drought in New South Wales,
yep,
would we care?
seemingly not then. So, you know, where does it lie? So you start to see where problems arise if you can't make a general rule that makes sense, and if you have to start introducing exemptions that suddenly don't make sense as well. Like in summer, cyclone season, you could never schedule a festival in summer because of a potential cyclone in North Queensland. It could mean that there's, you know, tough times. So I would argue that because there are tough times, that's exactly when you do need festivals. Like, that's when people actually need something to uplift them and keep the spirits up. Like when
Is that why the Romans had the Colosseum?
No doubt.
To entertain the poor masses.
Yeah, like it's when
Bread and circuses.
yeah. So it's when there are tough times that a festival's a good idea, I think, to lift spirits. And, you know, are we just going to say it's just the city folk who can't have festivals when times are tough in the country? Can we switch that around and say, does it apply that people in the country can't have festivals when times are tough in the city? So like Chinchilla, 3 hours west, has a melon festival. But, you know, if Brisbane's in flood, do they stop having their melon festival?
No, they're heartless out there.
Exactly. And, you know, why limit it to natural disasters? If people are suffering from something, then why do we withhold our festival because it's a physical suffering from a natural disaster? You know, what if the stock market plunged 20% or housing prices did and people were like out of work or whatever? Like,
And stockbrokers were jumping out of skyscraper windows. Would we cancel our own happiness and donate to stockbrokers' families?
Indeed. And the other point I was making to you was there are retail businesses in Brisbane who are doing it tough, like really tough. You would not be, like, owning a retail shop at the moment
gig.
is as tough as owning a farm. You know, no apologies. Like, it's tough out there. They're really working hard, can't make money.
Yeah.
So they're relying on fireworks nights to
generate a bit of income.
Exactly. Casual workers who are working in the restaurants and bars around the city, like
They need
they're
those
relying
shifts.
exactly. So, so you're actually causing them a disadvantage by not having a festival. So
it's actually, rather than a waste of money, it's an investment in the local economy.
there's a whole bunch of reasons. It'd be very hard to frame a principle that would that would not soon become nonsensical and require strange exemptions that clearly wouldn't apply. So I think it's pretty obvious. It's a stupid idea to cancel the festival. Obviously, if there's a danger of things catching fire in Brisbane, you don't hold
you
a
wouldn't
fireworks
fireworks,
festival.
yeah.
But assuming that's not the case, then go ahead and have it.
And when is it? It's in a couple of weeks,
Yeah, it's
isn't
in a
it?
week or two time, something like
28th of
Ah,
September.
okay. So
Yeah.
2 weeks.
that. Yeah.
So
Week
not
and a
me and the
half.
better half are going out to see Muriel's Wedding, the musical.
Okay. So you're not going to take in the fireworks?
No.
Okay.
Rex in the chat room says, is it paid predominantly by the Brisbane City Council and ratepayers? If so, then they can decide to do what they want with their rates. Well, that's...
It's paid for by the state government.
Is it Riverfire? There we go. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that gives the irrits to a lot of people who don't live in Brisbane.
Yes, I imagine it would.
You know.
And there had not only the drought, but there was those big floods in North Queensland, which affected a lot of people.
And the state government provides money for festivals and things in other regional areas
I dare say they
at the
do.
same time. Yeah. There we go. I thought that was just an
In
insight
fact,
into
isn't
my
the state government
thinking.
going to partly fund a new stadium in Townsville, new football stadium or
yes.
something?
Partly or fully, yeah, exactly.
There you go. So
Yeah.
maybe they're getting their share.
Yeah, I just think you're really mean-spirited if you go, you people over there can't have fun because those other people are there
Yeah.
are not having fun.
Yeah.
So, okay. Catholic Church in Tasmania, there are now new laws requiring priests to break the seal of the confession and
Yeah.
to report suspicion
About
of child
bloody
sex
time
abuse.
too.
So the law has been passed, and the Tasmanian Catholic priests have said that they will not be complying with that law.
Round them up.
Yeah.
Over Jesus' dead body, that they'll break the confession, right?
Yeah. So they've just said we're not going to comply. I mean, they're just renegade criminal enterprises, the Catholics. And we are going to give them a whole bunch of extra privileges in this religious discrimination bill, despite this sort of stuff.
They act as if they're a law unto themselves, and they probably think they are, the canon law.
To any submarine Catholics out there, I just want you to understand something. That a very small portion of whatever money you throw in that plate goes towards the maintenance and upkeep of an international child rape cabal.
Who refuse to comply with Australian law. I
Exactly.
think they're above it, yeah. Right. Well, while we're on the topic of religion, are you guys ready for a Bible quiz?
Oh, are we ever?
Yep.
We love Bible quizzes, don't we,
Yeah.
Scott?
So I've mentioned before, Cam Riley is doing his he's doing a movie on
Is he?
the early days of Christianity,
Oh,
and it'll be out soon. We'll probably have a screening here or something like that.
Oh,
So he was just trying to get some information about how much people know about the Bible as part of his sort of marketing and information gathering for that. So. So I've got up on the screen here his little quiz, and I thought we could do it together, and between the three of us, maybe I'll get a really good score. So
so we're allowed to combine our
yeah, I think
knowledge.
so.
aren't
We won't tell Cam, so he doesn't listen. I don't think so. Right, play along. Maybe I should put this on the screen actually for those who are in the chat room. Let me do that. So, it's not going to do that part. Sorry, guys. I can't do
Get
it.
a piece of paper and a pen.
Yeah,
Take notes.
yeah. Sorry, I thought I might be able to do that, but I'm not going to be able to. Okay. Who was the first? Yes, beer, please, Scott. Who was the first person to mention Jesus in writing? Peter, James, Paul, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John? Who was the first person to mention Jesus in writing?
John,
Okay, John? Why are you saying that?
I'm guessing.
Oh, okay. John. Tick. Which
Was he right?
I don't know. I'm going to put it through and see. Which New Testament writers were eyewitnesses of Jesus? Peter, James, Paul, Luke, Mark, Matthew, John, all of the above, none of the above.
Did you mention Paul?
Peter, James, Paul,
Right.
Luke, Mark, Matthew, John.
Okay, not Paul.
James was supposed to be Jesus' brother. wasn't it?
Is that the same James?
Don't know.
Right.
It's a pretty common name these days. I don't know how common it was in, 2,000 years ago.
Which New Testament writers were eyewitnesses
Palestine.
of Jesus?
Okay, not Paul.
Peter, James, Paul, Luke, Mark, Matthew, John, all of the above, none of the above. So
No, Paul wasn't a witness of Jesus because he came. He was a Jew that was out there trying to persecute the original Christians.
and the New Testament writers were actually writing 30 years or whatever after the
Absolutely,
death.
yeah.
So
And even the so-called Gospels,
yeah. So I'm going to
nobody really knows who wrote them.
So I'm going to put none of the above because the actual writers were not eyewitnesses.
No.
Paul wasn't. He never met him. Are you okay with none of the above?
I'm okay with that.
All right.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Which gospel was written first? Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John? I think it was Matthew.
Well, that's the order it appears in the Bible, isn't it? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
But they also borrowed from each other, didn't they?
I know that. Yeah,
They're not
whole-
totally sort of separate.
Yeah, and I think when they were
Stories.
talking about the borrowings, in my mind it went Matthew, Mark, John, and Luke is how I think it went. So I'm going to go Matthew.
It's not something I've ever obsessed over.
When did Paul expect the end of the world would happen? Year 1000, year 2000, when the Antichrist appeared? Never. In his lifetime, he didn't know.
In his lifetime.
in his
Yeah,
lifetime.
I'll agree with that. Which of the following people were Jews? Paul, Peter, James, Jesus, Herod, Mary, Joseph. All of the above, none of the above.
All of the above.
Oh, Herod wasn't, was he?
Yes, he was.
He was.
He was a king of a Jewish king.
Oh, was he?
I believe so.
He was appointed by Rome, though, was he?
I think so, but I
Right.
think he was Jewish. I could be wrong, but I think he was.
When did... Let me just... see if I can just... Sorry. Let me just... make that
What about
small.
that penis that Mary was holding? Was that Jewish as well? That ginormous one.
Bear with me a sec. When did Paul believe Jesus became special to God? At his baptism, at his birth, he always was, at his crucifixion, at his resurrection.
Say that again?
When did Paul believe Jesus became special to God? At his baptism, at his birth, he always was, at his crucifixion, at his resurrection.
This is Paul.
Yeah, when did Paul think Jesus became special?
At his crucifixion.
Don't know.
No idea.
Okay, at his crucifixion. Who did most Jews think the Messiah would be? A miracle worker, a warrior king, a high priest, a wandering preacher.
Warrior king.
Yep. Why was Jesus executed by the Romans? Over religious issues, over political issues?
Over religious issues.
What does Jesus Christ mean? The Lord, the Saviour, Saviour the Saviour, none of the above, it's just a name. I think it's Saviour the Saviour.
I think it could be
Jesus is
Saviour.
just a name, but Christ has
Jesus
a...
Christ,
Christ.
I think, is Saviour the Saviour. I think it was like Saviour in two forms.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah,
Is Jesus, does that mean Saviour, does it?
yeah. I think Jesus
I think
and
Christ-
Christ both meant Saviour.
I think
really?
Christ means Saviour, but I didn't know about Jesus. I
Yeah,
thought
I'm
it
going to
was
go with
just a name.
Saviour the Saviour.
No worries.
Who were the authors of the Gospels? Disciples of Jesus, people who knew disciples of Jesus, all of the above, none of the above.
None of the above.
Okay.
I don't think scholars are really sure who wrote them. Are they?
Okay. And now I will submit.
And?
And now I've got to verify where there's a capture thing. And Cam, you've got me. He's got me verifying this thing with. You know, you can look at pictures and. Okay. Bear with us. Okay, that looks like it's gone. And I guess I'll get an email. Oh, view score.
How do we do?
I'm just keen to know. Not real well up here. 6 out of 10.
That's all?
That's all.
Oh, pathetic.
Who was the first person to mention Jesus in writing? It was John.
I said that.
Which gospel was written first? It was Mark. When did Paul believe Jesus became special at his resurrection? And why was Jesus executed? It was over political issues. There we go.
I thought it was religious issues, wasn't it? Because the Jews were the ones that wanted him put to death.
Yeah, but the political issue could have been his claim to be king of the Jews. Did he claim to be king? At least he was said by some of his followers to be a potential king. So that's a political issue.
So did anyone in the chat room do better than us? They're discussing the issues there.
They wouldn't dare.
Right. Now, we mentioned unemployment benefits and the drug testing of welfare recipients and went to town on that. So I saw, why did I do this? I read the editorial in the Courier Mail. Just self-flagellation here,
Wouldn't you think he'd know better by now?
No wonder I'm depressed.
So, yeah.
And basically he was saying, or she, that unemployment benefits should not be seen as an entitlement, but as a payment that requires something in return.
Come on.
It's the whole concept of mutual obligation that is entrenched in our welfare system. So then there's an article here from a professor and specialist in drug policy, University of New South Wales, an article in The Conversation. And she is saying that on topics like this, we are relying on different ways of viewing the issue, and we can just slide past each other and not address our issues. So the proponents of drug testing, people who are in favour of it, argue from the moral positions of contractualism, paternalism and communitarianism, whereas people who argue against it argue from a sort of a consequentialist, utilitarian sort of model. So back to the people in favour of it. Contractualism is that mutual obligation sort of thing. Paternalism enables those conditions to be ones where someone is protected from the consequences of their own poor personal decision making. And communitarian is talking about the importance of community solidarity. So whereas people like us the other week, or me, were talking about the lack of evidence supporting relationships between drug use and employment, and that there's not enough drug treatment programs and the costs associated with the proposal compared to the number of people who are going to be caught, and the fact that we view it as punitive and discriminatory. So she said if you're trying to change people's minds, you would really need to look at what their argument is, the sort of contractualism, mutual obligation one, and deal with that and say, well, we could argue whether the conditions for contractualism are met. Contractualism is built on the premise of fair reciprocity by both parties, i.e. both parties are problems. The conditions for fair reciprocity may not be met. So you kind of deal with, when you're arguing with people and saying, well, all of the arguments we made, they couldn't care less if they truly believe that mutual obligation is the key point. And you'd say, well, to be a mutual obligation, did these people have a chance in the first place? Are there really jobs there that they can do to do their obligation that you're seeking from them?
And is New Start actually facilitating their journey back into work?
Yeah.
Adequately?
So just an interesting way of how people slide past each other in arguments. If you don't address the one that they're actually thinking about, then your argument could be completely sound, but if they don't value that particular topic, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
That's really very interesting. I now understand exactly what you're talking about there.
And I can see that in some of the arguments I sometimes have with people, political arguments online, where I sometimes try to get them, I try and get sort of away from the central argument and come at them from a different angle. And they're just like, no, you can't do that. This is the argument, you know, refusing to consider that there might be another way of looking at it. And as you say, you know, people, I suppose most people assume they're more or less right, or they've got the correct information that they need to make a judgment, and nothing you say is going to shift them in some cases. I sort of had a little, almost an argument with a colleague in the staff room this morning who was talking about Brexit, and this colleague was clearly very passionate on the topic.
Right.
And
And so he thought Brexit was a good idea? Or a bad idea?
no.
Right. Okay.
The colleague thought Brexit was a very, very bad idea, and claimed that certain of this colleague's relatives who still live in the UK think it's a very bad idea. And I said, but that's just anecdotal. You know, I said, the British public were asked to vote and they voted to leave. And this colleague was saying, oh, well, they didn't really understand the issue when they voted that way. I mean, this is incredibly condescending, isn't it?
I think that's a fair argument.
It might be, but you could say that about every single political election.
But then,
You could say, well, they didn't understand what they were voting for, or they didn't understand the issues. Anyone can mount that argument.
you could, but you could say that the Brexit argument had technicalities to it, where people were deciding what was the economic result and the sovereignty results of the decision, and A, may not have known, understood, B, may have been misled.
Yes. But couldn't you say that about every single political election we ever have had?
Well, I think that the referendum was flawed because they asked one question: do you wish to remain or do you wish to leave? And you cannot drive everything down to a simple leave, stay, when you've got the very complicated issues in that Trevor has already alluded to. You know, I honestly believe that if you had your time over again, you wouldn't go ahead with a referendum.
But you could say
Possibly not.
You could say the Brexit vote is much more complicated and technical than an ordinary vote.
Do you think?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Well, when you go to a general election to elect a Prime Minister, you're electing somebody who is juggling all the complexities of running a country.
No. When you voted a normal election, Paul, what you're doing is you're deciding how you want corporate fascism delivered to you. Do you want it delivered by a Princeton-educated Goldman Sachs criminal, or do you want it delivered by a racist, nativist, Christian fascist? I mean, that's the choice that you get at a normal election.
Wow.
This Brexit one was much more technical.
No, I think
in Australia's case, we don't get the Goldman Sachs criminal. We just get Labor Party hacks, unfortunately. Because when I'm being screwed, I like to be screwed in style.
Yeah.
But
But look, the point I was trying to make was this person had very strong views on the topic and was not going to be swayed into thinking that there could be any other possible way to look at it.
Yeah,
That was the feeling I had.
Yeah,
and it almost turned into something nasty.
Yeah,
I was
you see, they were saying to you, this is a case of not full consent, not full
informed
capacity.
consent.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in law, in contract, if people have been misled, or if they don't have a mistake, or they don't have capacity, then you say the contract's void. And it is an argument that you could say people were misled and people did not understand what they were doing.
But you could probably argue it both
Yeah.
ways, couldn't you?
Yeah.
That people were misled by both sides, I think.
Yeah. I don't know.
I think
Potentially.
what you're saying there is that you can blame the misleading on one side or the other.
But it's a useful argument when people are saying, well, it's democracy. The people decided Brexit. But the countervailing argument to that is, well, actually, they were misled and they didn't have capacity, so that was an invalid decision.
I think if you rerun that referendum now, I think you get a much higher turnout there, and I think you'd end up with a very different result.
That was interesting because that was one point that this colleague made was the turnout was so low that it shouldn't really count. And I said, well, that's what you get when you have a non-compulsory system.
Right, new topic.
Same thing happened with Trump. He was only elected by how many million American voters elected Trump?
I think this,
50 million or something?
it was a bit over 50%.
Yes,
voted.
but they don't have compulsory voting either.
Correct.
And so it was altogether, I think it was only like, was it 50 million or 100
It was
million? I don't
similar.
know.
It was similar to the Venezuelan turnout, which some people described as being a terrible election and questionable, but the actual turnout of voters was very similar. But I digress.
I think you could argue that the US election was terrible turnout too.
And that they were misled, that the voters were misled. I mean, for goodness sake, I think it happens just about at every election.
Yeah.
But the way the system works, if you run on a system where the majority of voters get to, decide, well, that's what you live with.
Just briefly back to Venezuelans.
Yeah.
It's a favourite topic.
For God's sake, we're not going to go through Venezuela again, are we?
There's a series in America. It's maybe it's a Jack Ryan. It's either a movie or series.
Yeah, it's a series.
Okay.
Actually, I was reading about this today.
Central to the plot is the idea that Venezuela is armed with nuclear weapons and will bomb the US. And that's the premise of this is US propaganda, in a sense. I mean, it's totally ludicrous to come up with a plot that Venezuela has got nuclear weapons. But this is all part of the demonising of Venezuelans and classic just sort of propaganda that goes on. Like, it's completely ludicrous. But people will, after the series or movie comes out, people in America will suddenly be more anti-Venezuela because it'll be like those evil Venezuelans. There's a chance they've got a bomb. It'll work on the It'll work on
But I don't
on
think
the
Americans
sentiment.
are against Venezuelans. I think they're against the Venezuelan government.
Once they think they've got a bomb, they'll be against them. That's the point.
No. I mean, we're not against the North Korean people.
Yeah.
I'm assuming we are against, as I am, against the North Korean political regime.
Yeah.
Not the North Korean people at all.
Well, it will drive anger against the Venezuelan government with the thought that they have potentially got a nuclear bomb just through the fiction of the Jack Ryan series.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you think fiction will start to impinge on people's perception of reality?
Yes. I mean, we're going to start having James Bond movies where the evil villain is from Venezuela at the rate we're going. So this is how you create bad guys. Yeah. Childcare subsidies. I want to talk about this one.
Yeah.
I'm a bit obsessed about think tanks because I read a book about think tanks and
Aren't they a good idea in general?
I think what they are, they're propaganda outfits, essentially. So they will have a cause which will be, libertarian values or such. Institute of Public Affairs is a think tank. And they will have a grand sounding name like the Centre for Independent Studies, or things like that. And you think,
Or the Australian Institute.
Yes.
Or something
And-
grand sounding.
yeah, or even on the left-wing side, the Grattan Institute or whatever. And you think to yourself that it's got some semblance of authority to it. And talk about the think tank, the Centre for Independent Studies. You think, oh, there's a group of people who are looking at stuff like
And they're independent.
researchers, exactly. But they're always got a bias, either, it seems to me, either left or right, a very strong bias. And the whole reason for them existing is to push a barrow in a certain direction. So
Probably at least partially true.
invariably, they've got very few members. Like, they might have a few hundred, but they get invited onto Q&A panels. They get invited into consultation with government. Like, they have so much influence.
Write articles for major newspapers.
They've nearly got as much influence as the religious groups, not quite. But so anyway, here's one from Dr. Fiona Mueller from the Centre for Independent Studies, which I looked up as a libertarian think tank. She was writing in the Courier Mail and talking about childcare subsidies. And she says, but despite this massive investment, at least half the parents eligible for the new childcare subsidy see the system as inflexible and unaffordable. The childcare subsidy is only available to families using formal centre-based care, such as long day and out-of-school care. These facilities are often hard to access, with too few places for infants and little flexibility for parents to change the frequency and timing. Rather than formal care, 50% of the mothers said they would prefer informal arrangements. They wanted the option to have a grandparent or other relative, a friend or a nanny providing care, with 66% even saying they would accept a lower subsidy if this meant more flexibility and affordability. So what they're wanting is, I don't want to put my kid in childcare and have a government public centre there. Give me the money that my taxes has contributed, my share, and I will have my own private arrangement.
I'll hire a young Brazilian student.
Yes. As a nanny, and I'll take some of that public money, thank you very much, and use it for my private purposes. It's private school all over again. Watch for this one, dear listener, as people say, well, you know, this is flexibility, this imaginative sort of stuff. But essentially it's saying, I don't want to be part of the public system. Give me my share of my taxes and let me have my own private arrangements. Thank you very much.
Okay, play the devil's advocate here. What about, you know, you were talking about injecting cash into the economy. What if those, you know, those mothers were in fact hiring, you know, young foreign, you know, adult students to come and take care of their kids a couple of days a week? That might not be such a bad thing for the economy.
By all means do it. Just don't use public money. So, you know.
But what if without that subsidy they couldn't do it?
Well, tough.
Well, tough. Exactly.
They're going to go to the government-provided childcare centres.
I mean, if we have a proper childcare service run by the government, then we construct facilities. That employs builders and other people. Whereas if we're doing it at home,
staff.
it doesn't.
Yeah.
Staff, exactly.
Hopefully properly qualified staff.
Yes. And, you know what these backpackers are like? I mean, they come to the country with $20 and a shirt and they don't change either.
Oh, my God.
So, you know.
That's a disgrace.
So anyway, I just
But
saw
they
that.
actually bring money into the economy as well, of course, you know.
Yeah. So anyway, I just saw that as a sign. Watch this space. They will be
After that next,
The hand will be out.
doing that and
Middle class
privatising
welfare.
and saying, well, here's your share. You can now tack on your extra bit and have your own private system.
You wouldn't put it past Morrison to buy votes with something like that, though, would you?
It'll play into the hands of his constituency. For
Perfectly.
Sure. Scott, you wrote to your local member?
I wrote to my local member, Mr. Ross Vaster. Would you like me to read my email?
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vaster. I wish to register my deep concern over the direction that the government has taken with respect to the issue of religious discrimination. I refer you to the following article from The Conversation. In particular, I point out the following 2 paragraphs from the article. Most would agree it's wrong to discriminate against someone for the reason that they are of a certain faith or indeed no faith. But this bill goes much further than other discrimination laws and weakens existing protections for LGBTIQ plus people, women, people with disabilities and other diverse racial and cultural backgrounds. Now, Mr. Vaster, I did not spend several hours at demonstrations and on the phone trying to get marriage equality passed in this country for all of that work to be undone with the stroke of the Attorney General's pen. I ask that you very, very, very carefully consider this before you support it. Thank you, Scott Clark.
Let us know if you get a response.
I doubt I will get a response.
Yeah. Hey,
Can I just say, I don't like the repetitive use of very just as an emphasis. One very should be enough, Scott. I'm sorry.
oh, you could edit it for him later. So
Well, fuck you.
tough. Tough. We've previously mentioned support animals.
We have.
Yes. Yes.
Out of control.
Yes. So we've talked. My favourite was the original one. Was Dexter the peacock?
Yeah.
Who was on the in the airport trying to get on as a support animal, and then we mentioned about miniature horses as being a legitimate alternative to guide dogs.
I have to say I was attracted to the idea of a miniature horse as a companion animal.
And so you can now find miniature horses on planes, basically because they're a guide dog. And the reason, dear listener, is that they live so much longer than dogs.
Do they?
Yes, they live.
How long?
You forget all that stuff we talk about on this podcast. So
well,
often,
yeah.
Paul.
I mean, I have to make room for the following weeks.
So the dogs, by the time they're trained or whatever, might last 10 years, and then you've got to retrain them. Whereas the horses will last for 40 years.
Seriously?
So
Wow. They're good value. The horses.
Excellent value, and they've got other characteristics that make them handy as guide horses. If
They're
you like.
cuddly. They've got big fat necks. You can put your arms around their necks.
Yeah, and there's certain other things about them. Because they're a herd animal, it makes them more appropriate in other reasons in spaces. So
You don't need to mow your yard either. You just get the horse to eat it.
that's it. Yeah, and I've got a link to an article where this woman did an experiment in New York where she basically just had these dodgy letters saying that her animal was a support animal, and she was invited to all sorts of restaurants, cafeterias, workplaces, doctor's appointments, and all sorts of stuff, and with different creatures, including a snake, an alpaca, a pig named Daphne.
Oh, she did it to test people's limits, in a sense, didn't she?
Yes, and it turned out that people were quite accepting of support animals. So there's links to the support animals there. But the other situation where people need support is when they're facing difficulty at work, where they might be being under some sort of disciplinary action at work, and you are invited to bring a support person with you if perhaps do you think you might be terminated, or there's a big problem at work where there's going to be a discussion about whether you're going to survive or not. And it's quite common now for people to have a support person with them in these difficult interviews. And there was a guy in New Zealand who, I'll just read from the article here. If you think emotional support animals have got out of control, prepare yourself for news of an emotional support clown. An Auckland advertising copywriter brought a clown to his redundancy meeting. New Zealand legally requires employers to allow workers the option of bringing a support person to disciplinary meetings, usually relating to an employee's prospective dismissal. And this company lost a significant client, began laying off people. Josh Thompson could see the writing on the wall, and they said, "Bad news, Josh, we have a meeting. We're having a meeting to discuss your role." Faced with the task of securing an appropriate support person for the potentially tense meeting, Thompson, a comedian who performs under the name of Joshua Jack, said, "I thought it's best to bring in a professional, so I paid $200 and hired a clown." The clown, who Thompson refers to as Joe, crafted balloon animals throughout the meeting, including a poodle. His antics were squeaky, and Thompson's bosses had to request he quieten down several times. It's further understood that the clown mimed crying when the redundancy paperwork was handed over.
$200 well spent, I would say.
Yeah. A picture of the meeting, taken through a boardroom with glass doors by an unknown spectator, is of compromised quality, though one can detect that Joe, the clown, is wearing a colourful hat and a yellow bib, and that Thompson, leaning back in his chair, indeed looks relaxed for someone in the process of getting laid off. Thompson said, "I mean, I did get fired, but apart from that, it was all smooth running." Yeah. Emotional support
and probably
clowns.
worth getting fired for, just to see the look on the faces of the people doing the dismissing.
Indeed. Right. Also follow up on previous things we've spoken about, which was penis artwork that we spoke about last week. Here's an article from New Zealand where a man used a chainsaw to cut the phallus off a Maori carving in order to please God.
Yes.
Yeah. So...
that was a bit brutal, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's on a walking track, and this guy was a committed Christian, and it was a carving that had been done by a local Maori person, and as is customary, everything was on display.
Yeah, and the phallus was quite large.
Yeah, although the man the sculptor, carver, the creator,
He toned
Kalana.
it down, didn't he? He scaled it down a little
Yes.
bit to, accommodate various
Normally they're
people's
quite oversized,
sensibilities.
and he minimised the appearance as a concession to sensibilities of non-Maori visitors,
Indeed.
Yeah.
Didn't want to scare them.
making it smaller and less prominent than is traditional. But that wasn't good enough for this Christian who went at it with a chainsaw.
He did.
The phallus dropped to the ground, and he copped a $2,000 fine. That's the only penis article for this episode. If you were waiting for that, it's done and dusted. And Bereijklian, who we were talking about before we started, facing a spill motion potentially, which didn't go ahead over the abortion law debate. Seems like 3 people wanted her out of the job.
There were 3 Christian nutters that decided to roll her over her alleged poor handling of the abortion law reform bill. Apparently, they didn't think that she was giving enough credence to some of the amendments that were being put forward by the other nutters on the backbench. So they decided that they would call a spill motion. They were ready to go, and then they called it off because they only had the support of 3 of them.
They didn't have a chance.
No, they didn't have
getting
a
it
chance.
up.
I mean, it was bloody ridiculous that you had Gladys Bereijklian had won the election 6 months ago, and she'd won it quite convincingly, hadn't she?
Well, relatively.
Yeah, and yet you had the nutters on the Christian side saying that they got to go, that she's got to go. It made no sense whatsoever.
It was just a stunt.
Yeah,
Still on Bereijklian, they've had lockout laws down there, and looks like they're going to scrap them. And I think that's a good idea.
A lot of people complained.
Yes.
They said it really killed the nightlife of the city.
Yeah. And the evidence is that people got as drunk as they were before because they were preloading at home. So incidents of people being drunk was still the same.
Yes.
There was less violence in places like King's Cross, but that was because there were less people because they all moved to other districts where there wasn't the lockout laws. So overall, it just shifted the problem around the city. It didn't solve it at all. And so they're going to forget the lockout. Well, they're going to get rid of the lockout laws. Yeah.
They're going to relax them in some areas, but not in... I think they were still going to keep it in King's Cross, weren't they?
I don't know. I had the feeling they were just getting rid of it.
I don't think so. I think they were getting rid of it for the main part of the CBD, but keeping it maybe just in like Darlinghurst Road, that central part of King's Cross.
Yeah. I think this has been an example. I suspect these laws came about through pressure from families of victims, like terrible stories of kids who get king hit outside of a
And they're
bar.
horrific stories.
Terrible. And they say, well, my son would still be alive if these people weren't, if the perpetrator wasn't as drunk, if they'd been not served, if there were lockout laws or whatever. And but some of these things just can't be solved by
You'd say the
banning
same
things.
about motorbikes.
Exactly.
If the motorbike had never been invented, there'd be a
sorts of
lot
things.
more people still alive.
So it just shifted the problem to other areas. And of course, if you owned a casino, well, there was no lockout laws. So
They had an
places
exemption.
like that became quite popular. Right. I think...
We heard a penis story from Jacinta Price. Do you remember, Scott?
yeah.
It was an traditional Indigenous story. It was hilarious. But I don't know whether we should share it or just encourage people to go along and hear Jacinta. Because
I think Jacinta's actually finished her tour now, so they can't go and see her. But
it was a wild story.
the story was that there was this guy that could detach his penis, send it underground, and then it would then pop up another and have its way.
This is a Dreamtime story.
Yeah.
Some sort of Indigenous traditional story.
Right, a subterranean penis.
Yeah, they would go up there and effectively copulate with other women.
Right.
And this one woman was then when she beat the shit out of this penis and that sort of stuff, and she killed it.
Didn't have a hacksaw. Didn't have a chainsaw handy.
Well, it had already been.
Already been detached. It was
yeah.
free. Yep, it was
Free
free wheeling.
roaming penis.
It's
Yes.
free wheeling willy.
Yeah. So she beat the shit out of this penis to the point where it died. And then the guy grew another penis again, didn't he?
I don't recall the details,
Yeah.
but what I recall is one woman's clitoris detached and
Yeah.
dropped to the ground.
And became a willy wagtail.
That's
Yeah.
right, became a willy wagtail.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? I mean, I just never imagined Dreamtime stories could be that interesting in a sexualized sort of way.
Yeah. Well, my opinion of Dreamtime stories hasn't improved as a result. No.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. I reckon we're coming to the end of it, dear listener, on this one.
The end of the world?
End of this episode.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, episode 220. If you've got ideas for topics, let us know. Send them in. If you come across some interesting articles or thoughts that you'd like us to talk about or concepts that we haven't
Particularly
addressed.
if it has penises in it.
Yeah. But any
We don't have to
ethical,
talk about penises all the time.
Oh, we don't?
No.
ethical conundrums are good. And
Indeed.
And if there's something going on that you think we haven't addressed, then tell us about it. Because my notes now, not a lot happened since last week, so I've chewed up a lot. I'm running out of topics. I need some sent. So
You're running out.
yeah,
It's hard to believe.
yeah. So it looks like they had a good time in the chat room. Looks like it's been very civil. Good on you guys in there. And yeah, I think unless you guys have anything else, no.
That's about it.
Okay, until next time, thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in the chat room. Talk to you next time. Bye.
Thanks very much for tuning in. Bye now.
See you, everyone.